Good morning, everyone. This is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 4, Thursday, October 20th, 2011. This is the orders of the day. This is televised today, and this is pursuant to Standing Order 1082, study of the Immigration Application Backlogs in light of the action plan for faster immigration. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. We're half an hour late already. We have a choice. We can cut down. Oh, and I might add, Mr. Davies, you'll notice in the second round of witnesses, we only have 2 witnesses. The third one was from the NDP list. That person got involved in a motor vehicle accident and is unable to come. So yes. That's the reason why there's only 2 names. But we are already half an hour late. So I need quickly for guidance from the committee. We have a choice. We can just make the meeting shorter, or we can go past 1 o'clock. Mr. Davies.
Mr. Chairman, speaking for the official opposition, we'd be more than happy to extend the meeting by half an hour so that we can not only have the benefit of the minister's full time, but also the 2 witnesses who have traveled, one of them, Mr. Curlin from Vancouver. So I think, in fairness to those 2 witnesses, we should do them the courtesy of hearing from them.
Mr. Dijkstra? Mr. Lamoureux?
Choice, Mr. Chairperson. My choice would be is that we would deal with the witnesses first, and then we have the minister come back when we could have him for 2 hours, but I don't think I'm going to get that choice.
No, you're overruled. So welcome, Mr. Minister Kenney. I appreciate you coming today to help us with this issue. 2 of your colleagues were here at the last meeting, and if you wish, you can introduce them.
Oui.
You have the floor for up to 20 minutes.
Bon, j'essaierai d'être plus bref que ça, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous et merci à tous les membres du comité permanent. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être devant le comité permanent pour la première fois de ce Parlement. Et j'aimerais féliciter tous les membres de leur démarche et particulièrement, j'aimerais remercier le comité d'avoir choisi comme la première étude de ce Parlement une étude sur la question des arriérés dans notre système d'immigration. C'est un problème assez grave, je dirais, dont nous devons tout ensemble trouver les solutions. Donc, je suis heureux d'être ici avec nos autres fonctionnaires de Citoyenneté et Immigration Canada, notre sous-ministre, M. Neil Yates, notre sous-ministre adjoint pour les politiques, M. Linklater, et la sous-ministre pour les opérations, Mme Deschênes. Et je dois dire, Monsieur le Président, on est très chanceux. Moi, en tant que ministre, je suis très chanceux d'avoir les fonctionnaires tous les rangs du ministère si compétents et si dédiés. Donc, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais vous donner un exposé sur les grandes lignes de problématiques des arriérés dans notre système d'immigration. Tout d'abord, je dois dire que le problème des arriérés, d'une certaine façon, se reflète le fait que le Canada est peut-être la destination globale le plus désirée à l'échelle globale. So, Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that the problem we have with inventories, the technical term in the ministry is inventories, the common English is backlogs. Whatever we call them, they are partly a reflection of the fact that Canada is, I believe, the most desirable destination in the world. In fact, last year, Ipsos Reid did a global poll from which they estimated that there are at least 2 billion people around the world who would like to immigrate to Canada right now. 77% of the people in China, 71% of those in Mexico, 68% in India, etc. And they didn't actually survey in every country of the world. So this is a reflection of the good problem we have that Canada is seen as such a land of opportunity, prosperity, and democracy. And this, of course, is why we must have a managed immigration system. You know, The objective of that managed immigration system is to attract and select those people to Canada who will make the maximum economic contribution to our country in part. It is in part to deal with the challenge of our shrinking labor force in the future because of our aging population. It's in part to try to counteract that aging demographic, so we frankly have more people working and paying taxes, contributing to our country and economy and its prosperity in the future. And of course, we also seek through our immigration programs to discharge our humanitarian obligations as the country which now receives the highest per capita number of resettled refugees in the world. Now, so there's that huge, almost infinite supply, if you will, people who, what we would call in immigration policy, a huge push factor from all around the world. So how do we do in terms of receiving people? Well, on slide 2 we can see that Canada has very high levels of immigration. In fact, over the course of the past 5 years, our government has received the highest sustained level of immigration, that is to say, of permanent residents, not just temporary residents, but the highest sustained average of permanent immigration of any government in Canadian history, with an average of 254,000 admissions. Admissions is a term that used to be called landings, but that basically means when someone comes here has the right to stay permanently, to work and to live in Canada. That compares to the previous 12 years when the average was 222,000. Now, to put it in relative global terms, this represents about 0.8% of our population that we add on average per year. That is the highest per capita level of immigration in the developed world. I say the developed world because many third world or developing countries don't really have a control of borders or a managed immigration system, so they're not a fair comparator. But the only country that I think comes close to our levels right now would be New Zealand. During and since the recent global economic downturn, many other countries actually cut their immigration levels. I'll give you one example. The United Kingdom has a population about twice our size, and they are right now restricting immigration to about 100,000 a year, when our average intake is a notch over 250,000 a year, so 3 to 4 times more on a per capita basis. That just gives you one point of comparison. Now, donc, pour s'adresser aux problématiques des arriérés, c'est un problème d'une certaine façon assez simple. Il y a un calcul mathématique pour exprimer comment nous arrivons aux arriérés dans le système d'immigration. So the backlogs are a function of very simple, basic math. And here is the calculation. When you get more applications for immigration than you get than we're able to admit, you end up with a backlog. So when total applications exceed total admissions, you get a backlog. And when that happens year after year after year, the backlog grows. And as the backlog grows, of course, so do processing times. Even though the time it takes our ministry to process a particular application may shrink through operational efficiency, the total time it takes someone to go from the point of application to the point of admission gets longer, not because of operational inefficiency, but because they're simply waiting in a growing queue. Inversely, the inverse mathematical formula is when the total number of admissions exceed the total number of applications, backlogs shrink, and processing times speed up. So I invite you to remember this basic mathematical formula through today's hearing and all of your studies. There are a lot of interesting issues to be discussed. Man, at the end of the day, it's a very simple mathematical problem. So let's see how this works out in any given year. I'll just take, for example, 2008 is the last year for which we have full stats, and it's an average year in terms of numbers for the past several years. Donc, on peut voir sur la page 5, and I hope you see that we have these video screens, that we established an operational target for 2008 for admissions in the range of 250,000, which is about average for the past several years. we assessed those applications, and we found that about 250,000 were met our criteria and could come to Canada, and about another 100,000 applications were rejected. But here's the problem. We received about 450,000 applications. So that is to say that the total number of applications that we received exceeded the total number that we were able to consider that year by about 100,000. And this is the problem we've had year after year. Now, another way we could look at this is to think if we were to actually try to welcome or process everyone who would like to make an application, and based on the Ipsos Reid poll, that would be over 2 billion people. I just throw that in there just to give us a sense of perspective about how much sort of supply there is versus our ability to accommodate that demand to come to Canada. Another way of looking at this, a metaphor that I often use, is to look at how a transport company would sell tickets, because I think it's it's a good way of considering the problem of backlogs. So let's say that this is essentially what happened, and the problem really picked up momentum following the adoption of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act by the previous government in 2001. Because that act created a legal obligation on my department, on the government, to process all new applications to a final decision, regardless of how many people we plan to admit or practically could admit. So there was, frankly, I would say, an irresponsible policy decision that threw completely out of alignment the number of incoming applications with an obligation to process them versus the capacity to admit people and settle them in Canada. And that is why one of the primary reasons we've seen this problem. So one way of explaining this metaphorically would be to say that over the past decade or so, the government of Canada was, on an annual average basis, selling 400,000 or more tickets on the plane to Canada, to that market of 2 billion people who would like to buy those tickets. And yet, even though we've been maintaining our highest average levels of immigration in our history, the highest averages in the developed world, unprecedented levels of immigration to a developed country, notwithstanding that, we've been admitting about, on average, 250,000 people. It was a little less than that under the previous government, a little more than that under the current government. So every year, selling 400,000 plus tickets, admitting, let's say, for sake of argument, 250,000 people. What does that mean? 150,000 customers, if you will, who bought their tickets to Canada, who paid their fees, and those fees went into our general revenue fund, and we cashed those checks. And they end up at the airport saying, "What happened? The plane, you oversold the plane by 35%, and we're left sitting here." And we say, "Yeah, sorry about that." And the next year we come back and we sell another 400,000 tickets. We say there's 250,000 spots on the plane to Canada, and then that crowd at the airport grows to 300,000 the next year. And then the third year, we do it again. And the next thing you know, there's a growing number. At that point, 450,000 people in the backlog, and year after year after year. That's how you end up with a backlog of over 1 million people. It's because governments, and here I will admit that our government did not act quickly enough to reverse the policy mistake of our predecessors to align the number of applications with our capacity to accept newcomers to Canada. And so this is not the fault of one government. We must accept some of the responsibility for not having acted more quickly to better align applications with admissions. But this is why we've now ended up with a total backlog in all programs of just over 1 million. In fact, I think it's just bumped back down below that. But so let's look at this over time in the past decade. On slide 8, you'll see that in 2001, the backlog was just under 700,000. But here's the interesting thing: the bottom line shows the immigration target. This is what we call our operational target. And you'll see that it's gone up over the course of the past decade to about 250,000 a year.